Hi, Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns. Before we get going on this week's wood turning project, I want you to remember that the 9th annual Christmas Ornament Challenge is coming up. Submission period is during the month of November. We're going to have a whole lot of fun, illustrate a lot of great work by a lot of different craftsmen, and will be some piece of celebrating Christmas in a good, meaningful way. So, November 1st to November 30 is the time that you put it in. Details are on my website as aswoodturns.com/challenges. So this week I decided to do something more with spheres. In this case it is a set of 5 spheres on a base: walnut, sweet gum, cherry, ash, and olive. Now you may say, oh, okay, well that's something, but this is more dynamic because you can adjust it every so often to have a slightly different form. So let's get going on this, not sure what to call it yet, but a stack of spheres. Usually I turn spheres in a spindle or end grain orientation. For these spheres, I wanted to hollow them but did not want to split them across the grain. Therefore I glued up wood with a cross grain orientation with a paper joint at the midpoint. A paper joint is glued with a piece of paper between the 2 pieces of wood. This joint later can be split because the paper gives way. I also glued on a waste block for an extra space for a tenon. The first order of business is to turn the second tenon. Once the tenon is finished, I make sure the length and diameter of my wood is the same. I either reduce the diameter of the cylinder or reduce its length to match. This block is sweet gum. Now I can do the simple calculations for the Octagon method. For a more detailed explanation, please see my video on spheres. For this section, the wood is cherry, but it is too long, so I need to shorten the cylinder. As I trim back the ends, equal distance from the midpoint, I am trying to leave the ends at a diameter near the size of an octagon side. If I overshoot, like I did on the right side, then I mark the ends for the next cut. In a chuck, the left side is a bit harder since the chuck is in the way. Drive centers leave more room for typical spheres. I am using a bedan for this narrow cut. What is a bedan? It is a cross between a parting tool and a skew with a French accent. Its cutting edge resembles a wide parting tool. It is more useful than a skew for this cut since the metal is stiffer than my skew when hanging far over the tool rest. As I proceed with the octagon method, I cut the left and right angled side from the mark on the perimeter to the mark on the wood on the cylinder ends. Then mark to divide each flat in half. Then mark again to divide each of them again. Before rounding off the sphere, I cut a shallow tenon on each end where I hope will not interfere later with the sphere. Then go ahead and round off the sphere, but leaving that tenon. While the sphere is still rough and still in the tenons, I take a thin knife and hammer, and with a few taps on the paper joint, the sphere splits into rough hemispheres. Remember that tenon I cut earlier? Now I can use it to mount the hemisphere while I hollow each half. I measure for a 3/8 inch wall thickness and note the half diameter. Then, starting with a spindle gouge but quickly switching to my bowl gouge, periodically I stop to measure the depth. I do not want the inside to exceed the outside. For my peace of mind, I did a smidgen of sanding. Last of all, I use a box scraper to form a shallow mortise and trim the rim flat. Then the other side, and the same for each sphere. For an intermission, I turned 5 loose double tenons to fit each sphere. These were tricky at this size and with no greater rim between the 2 tenons. Then glued the hemispheres back together using that loose double tenon to align and reinforce the glue joint. My pile of spheres is pretty ugly. They are not very spherical and have tenons on each end. Now to refine each sphere into a perfect sphere. This one I have mounted with a cup faceplate and a rubber stopper on my live center. The tenons stick out from the sphere. Now to carefully trim them back. If I had not cut those tenons, I should be able to refine my sphere in 3 mounts. However, with that tenon, it will take more. I discovered that when remounting and rotating the sphere, I did not need to return the tenon into the cup center. Instead, I did the rotation on the 3rd axis, keeping the old tenons in the cutting range. I have to keep rotating the sphere because with each cut, I'm making an elongated shape. With the rotation, the elongated ends are cut back to round again. Keeping the tenon area in the cutting zone ensures that it is always in the cutting zone. I think I did 6 or 7 rotate and remount sessions. The tenons disappeared and my sphere is round and perfect. Repeat for each sphere. At this point, I have a pile of round spheres, but they are not sanded. Then on to sand the spheres with at least 3 rotate and remounts for each grit. Actually, I did a couple of extras for 80 grit just to be sure they were perfect. The trick is to press the wood into the cup faceplate with enough pressure that it does not spin, but is not enough to crack the hollow wood. At times, it would spin, in which case I would tighten the tailstock a little more. If it left a burn ring, I would rotate it immediately at that point to sand off the burn. Finally, I apply shellac friction polish. I went through all the spheres, applying the shellac in the area between the cup faceplate and the stopper. After going through all of them, they had had a little time to dry. I went through them all again to finish the top and bottom where the cup faceplate was. When all were complete, I went through them all again at high speed to rub down the finish. After finishing the base, I drilled a hole in each sphere and glued in a short 1/4 inch dowel. After putting sphere number 1 in place, I chose a point to drill for the next sphere, and so on. That finishes my dynamic sphere tower. At first assembly, the spheres would twist and fall down. I applied thin CA to each hole and dipped each tenon in medium CA. After drying, they would stay in place. When I tire of my sphere tower, I can adjust the spheres for a new arrangement. If I am really bored, I can just play with positioning the spheres.
I consider this an art project with no other utility. The next question is, what else along this theme can I make? Each project grows from its predecessors, adding features and refinements. We will see what comes next, or you can suggest what comes next. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe on my website, and tell your friends. I appreciate your comments and questions. Every week I make a new wood turning video and add it to my website. As usual, I appeal for you to wear your full face shield for safety, anytime that lathe is running. I will see you next week with another wood turning video.